My name's Raymond Dean. I'm currently a state representative representing District 59B in the state legislature. That includes most of downtown Minneapolis, the southern part of North Minneapolis, which is where I live, and the area in between being the North Loop and the Warehouse District. And I'm running for Minneapolis because I believe it's time to do things differently in the city of Minneapolis. I believe that we need to end disparities entirely. We can no longer be satisfied with just working around the edges to try to move the issues that are so critical to a great number of people in the city. I think we have some urgent need when it comes to addressing affordable housing in the city of Minneapolis. We've lost incredibly lots of naturally occurring affordable housing, and the market is having a huge impact on the availability of housing for regular folks in the city. It's time for real police accountability in the city of Minneapolis. And I also believe that we need to look at climate change and its impact on the city along with environmental justice issues. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about the arts. When I think about the city of Minneapolis and its long history of arts, there was a time when it was mainly made possible by philanthropists throughout the city and the work that they had done. And today I believe we're in a very, very different situation. Although philanthropy still plays an incredibly important part in the arts, as well as the public sector supporting the arts, we also have many, many artists that are working artists. And they're working hard to follow their passion and to try to lead a good quality, substantial life, realizing that early on some of them may have part-time jobs, and we need to consider them not only as artists, sometimes as low-wage workers. So I'm excited to be here tonight and look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Well, my name is Jacob Fry. The 3rd Ward, welcome to the Sheridan neighborhood. Welcome to the Northeast Minneapolis Arts District, the #1 ranked arts district in the entire country. And let's give a little bit of applause for that. That's like a big deal. And then, and welcome to the Ritz Theater. I am the city council member for this area in the 3rd Ward. I was a civil rights attorney prior to that. But I think more importantly for this audience, I come from a whole family of artists. My parents were professional modern ballet dancers. They danced for the Lubavitch Company in New York City and then the Netherlands Dance Theater in Holland. My brother was a musician, and my sister moved out to California as an artist and then got heavily into the green economy and is doing quite well for herself there. But I'm running for mayor right now because I do believe that we need a fresh start, a very clear vision. And we've been in the news for a whole lot of the wrong reasons, and we don't need to be. We have an affordable housing crisis right now where we've lost 10,000 units of affordable housing in just the last 15 years alone. And by the way, a lot of people that have been displaced because of that affordable housing loss have been artists. We have seen a significant uptick in violent crime and shootings. And simultaneously, some really poor community and police relations. Those can be mended. Those two can work together. Those two are intrinsically linked, and we can make a huge difference. And finally, I believe that being in public service is not about being somebody, but it's about doing something. And right now in our city, we have a whole lot that we can be working on if we are able to build out a broad-based coalition. And the theater we're sitting in right now, the Ritz Theater, is a primary example of building out a broad coalition. We were able to work with a combination of the neighborhood association, the arts district, the Ritz Theater, the board of the Ritz Theater, and then ultimately Theater Latte Da, who's doing an extraordinary job right now. And what you end up having is this beautiful end result. And it's results that we're ultimately about, and that's why I'm running for mayor. And thanks so much for having me tonight.
Well, thank you all for being here, and I concur with Ro Preston that Man of La Mancha is an amazing show, so you should see it. I saw it a couple weeks ago. It's my all-time favorite musical, so it was a thrill to be here and take a break from campaigning. My name's Tom Hoke, and I'm obviously a candidate for mayor of Minneapolis. I'm a lifelong Minneapolis resident. I graduated from Washburn High School, and I think what I bring to this race can be something truly differential to the mayor's office and to the city of Minneapolis. I'm a former school teacher. I've taught for Minneapolis Public Schools, having taught 2nd through 6th grade at Wilder Anderson and Bethune, to name some of the schools. After that, I went to law school. But I was really interested in the city and what was happening with the city and city building. And so I found my way to the city, where I began to work as a project manager. And one of my projects was LaSalle Plaza and the State Theater. So I was responsible for integrating the State Theater into that larger project and overseeing the restoration of it and actually getting it up and running. I then had the opportunity to work on acquiring the Orpheum Theater and getting it up and running. I then went to the Public Housing Authority, where I served as the Deputy Executive Director for 6 years, held some major litigation, brought $100 million to the city of Minneapolis, secured senior-only housing for many of our high-rises, and then returned to the theaters, where I was responsible for securing, saving the Pantages Theater, the Mann Theater, and got that restored over a course of 6 years. I then founded Hennepin Theater Trust, which is the 501c3 nonprofit that today owns and operates the 3 theaters, bringing 500,000 people to downtown Minneapolis. I can bring that kind of energy, that kind of commitment, and those results to the office of the mayor, and so I appreciate your consideration, your first place vote on November 7th. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I am Betsy Hodges. I am the mayor of Minneapolis, and I'm running for a second term. And it is delightful to be with you here tonight. I did theater until I was 25. I had a theater minor in college, actually, and then started transitioning into politics. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about that. But the arts remain woven into my life. I read poetry every morning when I get up. I read poetry every night before I go to bed. I listen to music throughout the day. I am a reader of fiction and literature. And my husband and I spend time in theaters, seeing dance. I don't know how people get through their daily lives without the arts, and so it's woven into my life, and it's been woven into my administration. When I ran for mayor 4 years ago, I ran on a platform of doing the basics well in the city, making sure we were getting that right, making sure that we were growing and growing well, and making sure that we were reducing the gaps we have between white people and people of color here in the city, which are some of the largest in the country. And those 3 things are inextricably linked. And the solutions for all of those are linked inextricably with the arts and with creativity and with our creative economy. So doing the basics right, we have a creative city making program where artists are paired with projects in our departments to help those projects go better and go well. For growth, we are the 6th largest creative economy in the country. And I've invested in making sure we keep track of that over time. We're not the 6th largest economy in the country, but we are the 6th largest creative economy. It's one of the biggest drivers, and it exceeds sports in our town for how much income and how much it generates in our city. And for equity, woven into the heart of that, creative city making is about that. It's one of the best ways we've been able to bring equity into how we do our city services. But we also have to think about artists and the arts and how we can make sure that artists who have low incomes, artists of color, are surviving, thriving, benefiting from our community and contributing to it. And I have a feeling that will be part of the conversation tonight. And I do ask for your first choice vote for mayor. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nakima Levy-Pounds, and I'm running to become the next mayor of Minneapolis. In terms of my background, I am a civil rights attorney, and I taught law for 14 years, 13 of which were at the University of St. Thomas Law School, where I ran a civil rights legal clinic. In my civil rights legal clinic, we did a variety of work that was focused on improving the quality of life of people of color, those on the margins, the poor, and the working poor. And part of that work brought me into public school systems throughout the metro area. We looked at an issue such as the school-to-prison pipeline, in which young people were coming into the justice system. And what we found was that it was important for us to use the arts to go into the schools and to teach students about the impacts of different types of behavior on their involvement in the justice system. And so I had my law students create plays and different activities so that we could reach young people to do that. I also helped to form a nonprofit organization called Brotherhood Inc. that ran successfully for 4 years on a shoestring budget. But one of the highlights of that initiative was working with young black men who had been in the criminal justice system or gangs. And part of how we were able to reach young men and help them to become contributing members of society was to use the arts to tell their stories. So they put on plays that they performed throughout the Twin Cities that helped to build a bridge between people who did not have their experience, who did not know about their experience, to have some empathy. So I think that the arts are very important. I think that we need a paradigm shift in the city of Minneapolis because we have been considered the third worst metro area in the country. That is problematic. So the issues that many of you have surrounding the arts, surrounding the creative economy, surrounding continuing to improve our cultural vitality are issues that impact every part of the city. As an expert in equity, I am asking for your support to help lead the city of Minneapolis. I'm asking for your first choice vote on November 7th. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aswar Rahman. I'm running for mayor of Minneapolis. And in fact, I grew up in a house just 5 blocks north of here. And this is my first time in my life coming to the Ritz Theater. So this is very exciting for me, especially being on this side. I didn't think this is how it would end up. I thought I'd be on that side of the stage. So 10 months ago, I decided to run for mayor. And it wasn't an off-the-cuff decision. Our city, for the past 4 years, or 3.5 years, has been completely going in the wrong direction. And as a person of color, as a small business owner, and as an artist, and I'll tell you a little more about that, it is just simply much worse than it was 3.5 years ago. And that, I've learned, is not by accident. It's by how we as a city invest our resources. It's about how our mayor's office deals with the police department, over which it has complete authority. It's those crucial levers in our city hall that I think should be in different hands. And here's why I put myself into the front. Is because in Minneapolis, arts was my route to being the person I wanted to be. And essentially, so I'm a filmmaker. My background's in filmmaking. So we own a film studio. Now we're on our 8th feature film. We've had 2 film festivals. We work with major clients nationwide, whatever, all that great stuff. All that was possible because in Minneapolis, at the age when I was growing up, it was possible. I got the resources I needed. In fact, I called up the mayor's office one time, and I think I was 13 or 14 at that age. And I just said, hey, can you teach me something? Can you teach me how the city works? And they just let me come in. Mayor Ryback opened his doors. And that is how this city used to be. In the past 3.5 years, I'll bring this up over and over, in the past 3.5 years, we have turned away thousands of students from our MCTC's vocational program. That's the kind of city we are now. And those students could not go to MCTC simply on the basis of income. So these fundamental flaws in our society, in our city, that we are a city with a thriving arts culture, we are a city where ideologically we are about equity, well, we need to start acting like it. And it starts with our mayor's office, and it starts with leadership that's willing to put investments into the places that are necessary and not where they're not. And so we'll talk more about that. I'd also like your first choice vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you all. The way this is going to work is that I'll ask a question, and you'll have a minute to answer it. And Jacob is going to start with the next round. This debate is taking place under the auspices of the Arts District here. And within the Arts District, preserving affordable workspace is a top priority. How would you balance the push for citywide housing density while keeping artist commercial workspace affordable here in Northeast Minneapolis in this district? And please also note that we are not, the question is not about work-live space, but about workspace.
Specifically workspace.
Yes.
Okay. So the topics of both density and preserving workspace for artists are not mutually exclusive. Take the Third Ward, for example. The areas where we've built, where we've developed, where we've generated vibrancy have predominantly been on surface parking lots, on Superfund sites, on areas that were previously polluted and now have density and residential there. And what that does is it takes pressure off of some of the other areas that would otherwise see dramatic price increases, whether it's for residential or commercial or anything else. But here's what we need to be looking at. First, we need to be looking to preserve a lot of the industrial space that is presently in our city, because that industrial space can be used as workspace for artists. And we see that with several of the buildings around here, whether it's Northrop King or it's the California building, or a lot of these buildings are zoned properly so that you can have a diversity of use and people in them. And if we lose that, if suddenly they're converted to residential, then immediately what you're going to get is gentrification. You're going to get new condos that come in, new apartment complexes that come in, and artists ultimately getting pushed out. We've found ways to preserve artist space, and it's with live workspace, areas like the Pillsbury A-Mill, but it's also in areas like the Soap Factory, which is just hitting its groundbreaking right now. A lot of people said, like the Ritz, that it was going to die, but we've found ways to make it stay for the long haul.
So, as I understand the question, it's about affordable workspace for artists and how do we preserve that? Well, clearly, we need some specific financing tools that are available and directed particularly to artists, and that can be in the form of either, low interest loans. It can be loans that are forgiven, or it can also be in changing the tax structure for properties that are used by artists for workspace. Those are things that the city could look at and figure out in conjunction with the neighborhood. I think it's really clear that what we at the city need to be doing is first listening to the neighborhood. I know that you're going to be going through a planning process and figuring out what the planning process is, and then how it is the city needs to dovetail into that. I think there's some other things that we should be doing as well, though. We actually need to be sure that artists have access to capital, that they're actually able to make a living doing their art. And I have a number of strategies around what we could do to make sure that there's enough money flowing to artists so that they have the options about where they want to do their work.
Well, the issue about displacement and gentrification, commercial and residential, is whether or not the people who invested early, made the neighborhood so great and what it is, can stay there once other people discover how great they've made the neighborhood. And that is especially true here in Northeast, here in this arts district, where artists have come in, made this the place to be, and we want you to be able to stay here and enjoy the incredible neighborhood that you've created. And so there are answers about housing. There are answers about how do we avoid displacement in housing. But one of the answers that I have given already to how can we prevent displacement of our commercial spaces is the commercial land trust pilot that I proposed for 2018 in the budget. Meaning, let's do a land trust for commercial properties, much like we've done successfully for housing properties, so that they can remain affordable over time. That the commercial spaces that have made a neighborhood so great, and that would include workspaces, we can invest in those and make sure that we're successful. There are other strategies moving forward, all of them predicated on the idea that you guys made this place great. Let's make sure you can stay here and keep it great.
I think one of the ways that we can address the problems that you referenced is by making sure that we are able to plan and to capitalize off of the richness of our arts culture in Northeast Minneapolis and across the city. We really don't seem to have the expertise in the arts at City Hall. We're not focused on our arts economy, our cultural economy. That's part of the problem. We don't have a strategic plan from the city that actually benefits artists in the way that it should. So some of the same issues that you all have are issues that we hear from business owners who feel that the city is not responsive to their needs. So imagine, as some of you probably are, artists who are also business owners, feeling that the city is not responsive to you. So I believe that the city needs to have a liaison at a minimum in CPED who is responsible for helping to leverage the resources that you are already bringing to the table as artists, the ideas that you have, and thinking about rezoning as well for those who want to have spaces where you live and work. So those are just some things to think about, and I'll add more later.
So lack of affordable commercial workspace is a byproduct of a lack of affordability citywide. But specifically for this, and I think Jacob Frey pointed to this, zoning needs to change. I mean, there is room for growth. We know that there's been demand for growth in Minneapolis for a long time. but we have not kept up with it in terms of why is it that even just a few blocks up from here that we don't have anything more than single-family housing. We have one large apartment complex, but I believe that should be replicated up University Avenue along many corridors in Minneapolis. We have space to expand. So just for the first step, I think that's what we should look into, figuring out which are the corridors for growth and then turn them less and less into single-family housing units. And beyond that, the city, again, has to invest where it wants to see growth and not where we don't need to see growth. Where we do need to see growth is in general enterprise. I mean, this is a trend nationwide. People are simply not starting enough things. And in Minneapolis, too, that's exactly the case. To stimulate young people starting their own organizations, starting their own businesses, which, again, will result in an increase in commercial workspaces, that will require direction of city funds, and so if you go on my website, voteoswald.com, you will see a very specific layout of how we intend to use block grants in order to stimulate that new entrepreneurship in the city of Minneapolis.
You know, when I think about artist corridors, I think about that natural evolution that takes place, that it's kind of an area that's a little bit not quite really good and safe, and a bunch of artists move in and they transform the neighborhood, and then we know what ends up coming next is the cost of space begins to skyrocket. I think that one thing we should be considering at the city, beyond just making changes to zoning to make sure that we retain that type of space, is looking at how we can sort of curb the trendiness and the prosperity that comes along with it. Not that that's bad, but try to understand what are sort of the limits to maintain a neighborhood and a community without having it be so transformational that people are forced out. I think this is where artists come in, because I think that artists actually have ideas and they actually have solutions, and that they need to be at the table to talk about what can we do to secure and make sure that the commercial space stays reasonably priced. And if that means moving towards looking at rent stabilization for some commercial properties, I think we should have that conversation.
Great. The next question also is about this. It springs from this arts district, which is a nationally recognized and a proven economic engine in this area. There are cultural corridors developing all across the city. How can the city leverage arts districts to reach their fullest potential? And we'll start with Tom on this one.
Well, I know a little bit about that because I worked on the cultural district plan that happened to be on Hennepin Avenue and it runs from the Walker Arts Center to the Mississippi Riverfront and from Nicollet Mall over to First, and so it's a big chunk of land. But the idea there was to really take a look at all these disparate components, and there's some 57 arts organizations, by the way, along Hennepin Avenue, and nobody knows that, but really to use arts and culture as the connective tissue that would hold that all together so that you could actually get a bigger footprint, so that organizations weren't kind of hanging out there on their own. So imagine you could walk from one block to another and continue to have great, artful, engaging experiences on each block. And you might not walk the whole distance, but you know that you could. And the point of that is that it brought things together. Things were glued together so that it was much easier to talk about, and it created a destination for people. It's much harder if you have disparate components and people can't find their way around. So once you connect everything in that way, you can begin to brand it, and you can begin to you can label it, and you can name it, and you can map it, and it becomes far easier for people to simply walk around the area.
Our cultural corridors are some of the best ways we have to showcase the best of Minneapolis. You know, certainly it's here in Northeast. There's the cultural corridor on Franklin, the Native American cultural corridor. There's East Lake Street. There's Lowry. There's Broadway. There's just so many parts of town where so much is coalesced in one place. And a couple tools we have at our disposal to support that is first to treat them, yes, as cultural corridors and as business corridors, and ways to support the small business owners who are there in artistic enterprises. businesses. We have a business technical advisory program and a cooperative technical advisory program, and we can connect people with specialists in the creative economy through those programs. But also to treat them as part of our tourism master plan. One of the parts of the tourism master plan is to highlight our cultural corridors, to have them be places that we invite people to come to, that we send them to throughout when people come here to visit or when people come here for a conference. And we do have a creative city roadmap, and some of you in here actually helped us as a city. We had a deep and wide process to put that creative city roadmap together to talk about how we can enhance the lives of artists and use the arts in Minneapolis to enhance our city, and we can talk more about that. But that also involved our cultural corridors in the city.
I think that one of the challenges that we face is that we too often allow developers to drive development in the city. Whether that has to do with what's happening residentially or in terms of commercial space being developed. The problem is that we have put profits over people. We need to shift that paradigm and begin putting people over profits. And as development is taking place, we should not find out on the back end. We should be involved in the process and helping to put forward RFPs so that developers are responding to what we want to see unfold in our neighborhoods. We also need help from the city, which I would do as mayor, in terms of pushing forward community benefits agreements, where there is something substantive and tangible for residents in the different cultural corridors, along the lines of employment opportunities, thinking about community vitality in a different way, and also how the resources from developers are reinvested in the community. So we need to think outside the box and not continue to remain stuck in the way that things are.
So my biggest focus in this area is workforce. I mean, we mentioned this in the question. This has been a huge economic generator for the city of Minneapolis, the fact that we have such a strong creative aspect to our city. And that's not by accident. That's because we invested in it, because we, for a long time, were making sure that we were cultivating a workforce. So let me give you an example again, with MCTC, for instance. So every year, 1,700 students sign up to go into their low-income programs, 200 of them get in, so 1,500 students are churned back out, go get a minimum wage job. They could have gone into MCTC's photography program, into their fine arts program, into their this program, that program. I mean, the elements of our creative economy are not being strengthened. It's because we're not strengthening our people. And if we look around the room right now, our city's 40% minority. This room, factually, is not 40% minority. So we need to get to that point in the near future where we are strengthening our own city enough, where the young people in the city who want to go into the creative industry are given the support that they need to build a life for themselves that they want. And that would be my main focus as mayor, and what that ultimately means is putting resources behind it, funding programs that are good and moving money away from some non-important issues.
So when I think of the Arts District and when I think of our cultural corridors, I think that that wasn't created by the city. It was actually created by the people, the artists, the businesses in the different parts of the city. And the city can come in and actually assist the organizations and the groups that spring up around it. And I think that's an important role for the city to have. At the same time, I believe that the people in those cultural corridors should be the ones driving the conversation. They should be involved with issues around what type of funding is necessary to keep them thriving and keep them successful. And if we believe that it's something that City Hall is going to fix or take care of, I think we're naive at best. Oftentimes in government, we think that we have the answers. And what I found in my career is we don't always have the answers, and it's really important that we listen to people out in the communities. You know, when I think about artists and I think about the difficulty sometimes of making ends meet and second jobs, we can do a lot to support artists by making sure that we have good labor laws, that they have the opportunity to consider possibly forming unions or work groups that can actually have some power in the current structure that we have. So those are some of my thoughts relative to cultural corridors and how we can continue to support them and expand them.
So the question was how, as the city, can better leverage the arts. And a big way you better leverage the arts is, in many cases, is getting out of the way. If you were to go to an art opening in Paris, for instance, you have an artist that comes down from their second-story flat, takes the fire escape down, throws down a card table, puts a little stereo on the table, maybe a bottle of wine, plays some tunes, throws some art up on the wall, and maybe drives a nail in, and next thing you know, they've made their rent for the next 2 or 3 months. Think about if you were to do that in Northeast Minneapolis. Well, you didn't get a liquor license, so you get tagged there. You didn't get the sound permit, so you get tagged there. Didn't get a sign variance, so you can't put one up on the wall. And so by the time you finish this art opening, you've probably been tagged more times than the money that you've been making, and you don't make that rent. So, I mean, we have some brilliant minds and some amazing creativity here in Northeast Minneapolis and the entire city. And I think one big part of it is that the city at times needs to get out of the way. Now, there are other times when we can help facilitate and better leverage the next outcome, but I think I'll save that for another question.
I didn't fall asleep. I was thinking, so, this is funny. So this district, which we're talking about, was established under the aegis of the city's 2003 action plan, and there's another action plan being developed for the next phase of development here. What would you suggest? What ways would you suggest helping, as it were, to develop not just this action plan, but ways of developing the arts here in Minneapolis?
Well, we want to make sure that the things that are great about Minneapolis and the things that are great about our arts community are supported and can thrive, and we want to make sure that we're doing what we can as a city to support that. And so one of the programs that we have is a creative city making program, which I mentioned earlier, which is pairing artists with city departments to do outreach work, to hear from community voices so that people aren't always expected to come to City Hall, whether it's the tenant voices that we've heard, input on public works process, input on our strategic plan, on our comprehensive plan that we have to do for the Met Council. The creative city making project is incredibly important. And it has helped us vision a path forward with artists about how to do projects at the city. And so we can reflect that back. Any of the lessons that we've learned, we can use to support this district as it does its plan for the next 10 years, the next 15 years, and the next 20 years. But there's also the commitment as you come up with plans around housing, around commercial space, around how to support artists here in the district. What the request I would have is, can we be there? Can we hear the ideas about how we can support you, how we can invest in you, how we can maintain the character of this area while giving the support that you need without overwhelming you with that support?
I think if you ask the average artist whether he or she or they felt heard at City Hall, felt included at City Hall, felt incorporated into the plans at City Hall, the average person would say no. So I think that whatever we are doing now, we could accelerate it and take it to the next level. I mean, we are literally sitting on a gold mine in the city of Minneapolis in terms of what is happening in the arts. I mean, we are the 5th most culturally vital area in the country. And again, that's largely been driven by the work of the people, not by heightened levels of city investment, which should be happening because this is one of the industries that is actually growing. In the city of St. Paul, one of the ways that they have strategically invested in the arts is through their STAR program, where they take 50% of the sales tax proceeds and they allow neighborhoods and community members to apply for funding. So that they can help revitalize their community with arts, with culture, et cetera. 60% of the funds go towards loans and 40% goes towards grants. So we need to be talking specifics here as far as city investment is concerned. And even when we're having the conversation about downtown crime and downtown issues, that's missing a conversation about the arts and downtown revitalization. So I think that we have a long way to go as far as shifting the paradigm, and we can't get there unless we involve folks who are part of our creative economy in a more meaningful way.
So I think the tendency at City Hall now is to treat arts as if it was a garnish on the city, as if it was something that we bring in every now and then to get advice from, and then we move to the side onto other business. My big thing is, why isn't it that our small business resources in Minneapolis specifically have grants directed towards new creative enterprises in Minneapolis? I mean, that, again, like Nekima said, that is one of the few industries where we are seeing rapid growth, and that is to be expected because it is an industry that thrives on innovation. So I think when city resources are directed like that, and we make sure that the programs that we have available don't treat arts as something that you occasionally throw a small amount of grant money into and not something you bring into City Hall every now and then for advice, but as a genuine investment for the city, a good use of public resources, that's when I think we'll see real progress. So I think this new program that we're coming up with, the blueprint we're going to come up with, that has to take that into account, and all has to be geared towards strengthening the people of Minneapolis. And that we have one of the highest poverty rates in the country, and we have an opportunity here to leverage the strength of our creative economy into making sure that we have enough jobs, that we have well-paying jobs in the city of Minneapolis, and we have enough opportunity, and that way we can diversify the strengths of our city.
Yes.
The part I want to respond to is talking about arts as a garnish in the city is the exact opposite of what I have been doing for the last 4 years. The Creative City Making Project, we can name a dozen projects over the last couple, 3 years where we bring artists in and we pair them in departments and they are embedded in the work we're doing, not just the 1.5% of our capital program that goes to public arts, but actually using artists and paying artists to use their creativity to match them, embed them in city departments and the projects and the work that we're doing. That's not a garnish. That's inherent in the work that we're doing.
So I believe the question had to do with the area plan and the work that was done previously. And I think that this is one of those times where the city acts as just a facilitator of the process, and that you all actually design the process. I would suggest that you consider looking at making sure that you include a diverse set of folks in that process. Artists of color, indigenous artists, LGBTQ, folks that are non-binary, some of our differently abled individuals, and gender non-conforming artists, because that's really what the future of our city is going to be. You know, our city is approaching 40% people of color, and if we want to maintain a city that is like a diverse city that we become, it's inherent upon us to make sure that we are bringing people into those conversations and at to those tables. And I truly believe that the role of the city is to help facilitate what that area plan is going to look like for the next comprehensive plan, which, you know, we have to do every 20 years, 10 years with the Met Council to make sure that we're on track to meet the needs of the region.
Well, first, there is some talk about the 1.5% of the capital budget that's been allocated to the arts, and I worked with Councilmember Reich to ensure that that was an ongoing funding stream, because we know that when the arts are cut off, in fact, first of all, they're one of the first things to go, and they shouldn't be. And secondly, we know the capital that arts creates in and of itself. Next, you know, the Walker and the Guthrie are wonderful, but they don't have a monopoly on art and creativity in our city. We have some extraordinary things happening right here in Northeast Minneapolis, and I think it needs to be highlighted in a much bigger way, whether that's highlighting to those in the city, recognizing that we have some wonderful artists here and they need to be going and checking out the California building, or two, that's highlighting to tourists that come in. You know, in addition to having this wonderful beer tour over at the convention center, which for the record I'm for, we also need to have an arts tour as well, whether that's along our cultural corridors in South Minneapolis or our Northeast Arts District right here.
Well, let me tell you what I did when I had the opportunity to actually work on creating an arts district. And what I did is I brought on 4 artists from different disciplines, from theater, from dance, from music, and another field. And what they did is they led the entire process. And we engaged some 1,500 people. And we did a variety of things, from visioning to building models to moving the model around to a variety of places. But the artists were always there to engage. And that's what made it such a great, robust plan. You know, my view of the best way to lead planning is really, particularly in this area, but actually it's in a number of other areas, is to have artists lead it, because the planning process is a creative process, and we want creative individuals leading it so that we're sure to get the robust kinds of ideas that we really want in order to create the district that is really going to be successful. So we're going to listen to artists, we're going to have them at the table, and we're going to follow their lead.
Now we are going into questions, some of the questions that were pulled from the audience. We'll lead with this one. Very simply, why do you want to be mayor? Yes.
I want to be mayor of the city of Minneapolis because I have a sincere desire to effect change. I am not running for mayor as a politician. I am running for mayor as a change agent, someone who knows how systems function. And I also know how systems, if they are not changed, can impact those who are on the margins. So we talked earlier about the demographic shift in the city of Minneapolis. That's roughly 40% people of color. But our systems, our policies, our practices, our laws, and our resource allocations have not shifted to accommodate the growing levels of diversity here, which means that the entire city is going to be impacted. Indeed, we're already seeing the effects. Recently, we had the conversation about people wanting to lure Amazon here. And whether people agree or they disagree, there was an article in the New York Times that said, Amazon, we picked your headquarters for you. Of all the criteria that were used, Minneapolis didn't even make the first cut. And so we are resting upon the way that Minneapolis used to be in terms of its national reputation, and not looking at the way that things are and the way that they will be if we do not address the inequities that run really deep within our city. Again, I am an expert on these issues, and I am willing to throw everything that I can into working with the people to make this city more equitable.
Well, I want to be mayor because in the city of Minneapolis, we have public resources. We have $1.5 billion we spend every year on everything from roads to certain things I'll talk about that aren't quite nearly as important as roads. Of that $1.5 billion, there's about $70 million my campaign's found that we can redirect towards more important things. That $70 million goes to things towards, for instance, last year we spent $11 million on the Convention Center Plaza, which is a half a block park in front of it. The city itself ranked it as worthy of $0 of investment, but a line item in the budget gave it $11 million in investment. So my whole thing is expenses like that add up to about $50 million a year. We could be using that for 3 main programs for me. The first one is we have to fully fund MCTC's vocational training program. That's non-negotiable. That's 6,000 students every 4 years that get turned away at the door on what? Because their family doesn't have enough income. To me, that's just a waste of opportunity. 6,000 people. The second thing is we need to invest in early childhood care in Minneapolis. Our deep-rooted poverty, 25%, that is not by accident. It's because over and over we have waves of people coming in who are of adult age, but that means we don't fully invest into the resources that help our youngest citizens. And the third thing is we need substantial public safety reform. Go on my website, we got a 14-point reform plan, and it starts with civilian oversight.
60 seconds is tough to explain why I want to be mayor, but I'll give it a shot. I currently serve in the state legislature. I've served for the last 3 terms. In the past few years, I've watched the city and I've seen things happen that were a huge concern for me. Long before I was elected, I was engaged in working at the city, whether it's Capital Long Range Improvement Committee or whether it was the mayor's Great City Design teams under Mayor Rybeck. I'm an architect by training. So when I think about things, I think about systems. I think about how one thing you do in one place has an impact on something that may happen in another place. I think the city for far too long has been trying to address issues in isolation And I think that's gotten us to the situation we're in. So I believe that we need someone who is actually bringing a different way and a different approach to addressing the issues that have plagued our city, that have caused some of the largest disparities between white people and people of color, and someone who is willing to actually call out those things that are really, really difficult. Our city works for about 75% of the people in it. It doesn't work for 25%. And I'm willing to speak to those 75% to make sure that we're all working together to make sure that we lift those individuals that are still struggling in our city.
I love Minneapolis. I chose to live here before anywhere else because it was everything that I was looking for in community. I want to start a family here. My future is here, and I want to make sure that every bit of potential in this city is realized, and that's why I'm running for mayor. And right now, we have some divides in our city. And I think right now more than ever we need a bridge builder because being in public service, it's not about being somebody, it's about doing something, and there are specific things that need to get done in a hurry. I mentioned affordable housing at the very beginning. We've got a crisis right now of affordable housing where we've lost 10,000 units in just the last 15 years. And when we talk about affordable housing, it's not just putting it up, but where to put it. We have such a long history right now in our city of segregating out people, of intentionally pushing certain races, people of color, lower income, Section 8, low-income housing to North Minneapolis and other areas. I believe that we should have affordable housing throughout the entire city because I believe that when you have 1,000 different backgrounds at the table, then that's when great entrepreneurship gets triggered. That's when great ideas take shape, and that's really when our city is going to rock.
I'm running for mayor because after 20 years of running the State Orpheum and Pantages theaters, I did not believe that we were being served well. I believe that the city lurches from crisis to crisis. It has no plan to ensure the economic vitality of our city. What happens if a Target leaves? What happens if a Best Buy goes away? What about a General Mills? All venerable companies, but all facing strong headwinds. We have no plan. We have no real plan to ensure that everyone lives in a safe neighborhood. And we have no real plan to address affordable housing. When you look at the metrics for this city, we are moving in the wrong direction, and we need to change the trajectory, and I am happy to step in and do that and give it my best and serve you.
The best thing about the city of Minneapolis is the people of Minneapolis. And 4 years ago, we had a conversation together about who we are as a people, where we want to head as a community, and the kind of leadership that was needed to take us there. I was very clear that as mayor, I had 3 charges: run the city well, make sure we're growing and growing well, and make sure that equity is at the heart of everything we do because our growth depends on it. And because it's the best thing for our community. And I've been busy doing that for the last 4 years. This entire country has been in turmoil. We have been at the heart of some of the biggest issues this country is facing. And I have been a tough leader. I am a tested leader, and I am a progressive leader, and I have helped lead us through to a better other side, whether it's having to do innovation on how we fund housing and have a housing plan for the city, or whether it's building the foundations for community trust between communities of color and the police department. I have been there on the front lines making sure we as a community get to a better other side. In a world where Donald Trump is president and he is coming after cities and he is coming after the people who live in them, make no mistake about it, we need a tough leader, a tested leader, and a progressive leader who can bring us together and help get us through the discomfort of change to a better other side. I am that leader. That's why I want to be mayor, is to second term so we can continue the work we've been doing together and stand up to bullies who are coming after our city. And I ask you for your vote for a second term.
Thank you. This is going very well, and you guys have been so polite. There is a there's an immediate arts crisis now outside of this district. Intermediate Arts is one of the venues here in Minneapolis that's under stress and under threat. This venue, the Ritz Theater in the past, has also faced crisis. The Southern Theater, someone mentioned the soap factory earlier. What what should the city do to help an organization like this, and what kind of policies will there be? Do you propose to in dealing with crises to essentially build the ecology and keep the arts ecology here healthy?
Right, so when the threat of closure comes about, I think one of the most problematic things is that most organizations have a plan to recover. It's that first few steps are usually the most difficult to sustain through. So I know this from personal experience that whenever there is a major crisis, there should be a collective fund that the city can provide. And that fund should be fed into by the organizations that I think plan on relying on it. So when it comes to large theater organizations in Minneapolis, I believe that we should use the office of the mayor to organize that kind of a resource that we can rely on later. And I think that's a pattern that should be replicated throughout our city in terms of the different parts of our economy. So when it comes to separate industry, when it comes to the small business community, we should have a similar program where we can buy into a idea for an emergency fund that people can voluntarily feed into and feed out. And that, I think, is one of the main capacities that the mayor's office provides, is that we can create these arrangements, because at the end of the day, we're a city of 400,000 people. So our large arts organizations must all be interconnected, and we should be able to rely on each other for support in times of need.
So intermediate arts had been around for a long time. We just heard that Triple Rock is going to close as well. And I think that one of the things that happened coming out of that last recession is the attention to the arts shifted a little bit. Because of the loss of housing, because of the disparities we've had in the city, I think there's been a little bit of shift in the philanthropic community. And it's been hard for some of these organizations that have been hanging on by a thread to actually move forward. So I think the city has a huge role in actually working with the philanthropic community to make sure that, you know, these organizations that have been around for quite some time, that are doing amazing work, are able to get the resources when they go through hard times. I mean, you know, facilities and organizations like the Southern and like Intermedia, I mean, they go through ups and downs just like any organization. And the question is, what are we doing as a city, and what can the city actually do to make sure that the resources are available when they're going through those difficult times, and assure them that there's opportunities to capital to make sure that they're able to get through those difficult times as well.
I am someone that believes strongly in results. A lot of people can talk and pitch some rhetoric and form a task force and have a meeting, but at the end of the day, you know, we as public servants should be judged by the results that we get. And 2 of the 4 projects that you talked about are in the 3rd Ward, and those 2 are successful. The first is the Ritz. The Ritz was going through troubling times. There were some financial shortfalls. There were significant repairs that needed to be made. If you were to step into this building just a few years ago, it looked nothing like it does right now. And that took working with the Ritz Board, with the Neighborhood Association, with the Sheridan Neighborhood Association, with Theater La Te Da, and then ultimately the city as well, which we provided a forgivable loan on. We were able to bridge some of the gaps in financing. We were able to work with the philanthropic community and other people. Working with other people, we were able to get this done. Similarly with the soap factory. People thought that they were shutting their doors for the very last time and that it was ultimately going to be a defunct organization. But no, we just had a groundbreaking the other day. It will be retained as art space for the long haul. And this is something I'm proud of. It's not talk. This is real action. And at the city level, you can impact people's lives in a positive way on that very tangible level, and we've done it.
I think realistically speaking, when these unfortunate situations come up, and they do, and I have volunteered and served on the board of numerous arts organizations and understand the challenges that they face, you know, it's unrealistic to suggest that the city will be able to simply step up and write a check, and I'm not sure that that's what anybody's asking, but That's not going to happen. But the city can be a leader and a participant. The city can be the convener that brings the parties together to help solve the situation, because these are certainly Intermedia Arts, which is one of our venerable arts organizations, has been here. It certainly is deserving of the time and attention of the mayor to help pull things together, and that's how we'll get the problem solved. You know, all of these situations are very, very unique. They come out of different circumstances, and the mayor can help convene the people who will help us find our way forward and be an active participant in that.
Intermedia Arts was one of the first and key partners we had in our Creative City Making Challenge as a creative city making work as a grantee from the Kresge Foundation. We need our arts organizations of all sizes and all levels to be thriving in Minneapolis, to be the Minneapolis that we know we are. And so in the wake of Donald Trump, with the President of the United States who wants to quash voices of dissent, we know that arts and artists are and will remain under attack. So I pulled together leaders of our arts organizations in a series of meetings from our marquee institutions, as well as Northeast Arts participated, thank you very much, the Fringe Festival, smaller organizations as well, to say, what are you hearing and what do you need and what supports do you need in this time? And what artists asked for was, help us convene. You know, this convening that we've done is great, and help us get access to other folks who can help solve the problem. Yes, if there are resources available at the city, and the way that we can do it at the city is to build the arts into all the work that we do. Can we have some sort of cooperative for organizations and perhaps think about going for bonding funding for those organizations? And yes, in the philanthropic sector, making sure that those partnerships stay strong. There are some key foundations that have stopped funding the arts in the way that they used to. Can we find ways inside their new plans to fund arts and arts organizations so that we can stay strong as a community, especially at the time when we need artists' voices and arts organizations to be their strongest?
Here's the reality. The city invests in what it values, and the city can find money when it needs to. And I'm speaking from the experience of being a part of the 4th Precinct occupation. And within a couple of weeks of that 18-day occupation ending after Jamar Clark was killed, both Mayor Hodges and Councilmember Blanc-Yang proposed $600,000 to fortify the 4th Precinct. Now, we were thinking, well, with double-digit unemployment in some parts of North Minneapolis and throughout the city, how could we suddenly come up with $600,000 out of the blue? So if we had that kind, we had to organize and we had to block that funding from going forward. So if we have those types of resources that we could come up with in 2 weeks, what could we do if we were to actually establish a community arts investment fund that included input from artists in terms of how the resources are spent or whether they are held for crisis situations. We could also work with philanthropy to establish a revolving loan fund, which I saw the Minneapolis Foundation do. I was on their board for 6 years. And when minority-owned businesses were looking for resources to participate in the construction of the Viking Stadium, the Minneapolis Foundation leveraged its resources to come up with $1 million for a revolving loan fund. So we can be a lot more creative about addressing situations like this before they arise. But that means that we have to be forward-thinking, and we have to see the creative economy as being a very viable and valuable part of the city of Minneapolis.
This is a question from one of our attendees today. Given that that we're in a theater that came out of the neighborhood revitalization program, and that the Ritz has spearheaded arts and cultural development along 13th Avenue here, what does this tell us? How does this inform our decision-making process today and going forward versus the days of the NRP? I think it's a question. I should have reframed that. I think it's a question about basically how do we retain the what is your best decision-making process going forward?
So the Ritz is evidence that NRP Program worked. It worked for quite some time. And the city decided that they wanted to change it because ultimately some neighborhoods were doing things that the city wasn't happy about. I think we need to relook at how we engage our neighborhoods, how we bring resources to them, and let them best decide what are those resources or how those resources can be used to make their neighborhoods and their communities the best place possible. Not saying that we just have all that money with no restrictions or no indications on what it can be used for, but I think that NRP was an internationally recognized program on how cities work with neighborhoods to make the city a great place to live. And we've done away for it, and I think it's time to look back at what that program was, how it was formed, how it was funded, and consider looking at re-implementing NRP as a phase 3.
Well, if we look at the dollars that came for the rejuvenation of the Ritz Theater, whether it was directly from NRP, whether it was from the Sheridan Neighborhood Association, which I believe put in somewhere in the range of $30,000 to $50,000, or the City of Minneapolis, which did have a program and a forgivable loan that went into the Ritz as well, plus some very generous people from both the Ritz Board, the philanthropic community, and ultimately Theater Latte Da, the end result is that it's going to take a village. NRP, I think, was a wonderful part of that. And by the way, we were recently able to tackle sort of the NRP phase 2, the promise that we had originally made on NRP. And the reason it was able to be tackled is a good chunk of the area within the 3rd Ward, in fact, about 80% of it is within the 3rd Ward, was so successful, and the taxes that were generated from it were many times that which we anticipated. We were, 1, able to cut the district in half, but 2, still raise about double the money. And that money can then be doled out to other neighborhood associations to continue doing this great work. And, you know, I am not under the false impression that, you know, as mayor or as council member, you're able to get into every single one of these micro details. And that's the benefit of having some of these associations. That's the benefit of NRP, and that's ultimately the benefit that we were sitting in right now in the Ritz.
Well, I have always been a big proponent of neighborhood leadership and growing our neighborhoods. In my opinion, working with neighborhoods and having strong, well-funded neighborhoods makes the city's job easier, not more difficult. And I know that because I've actually chaired 2 neighborhood associations where we had NRP funds, and it was very helpful to be able to actually solve problems on the ground. But I think as we think about, you know, we're having really an arts conversation tonight, I think the city really needs to rethink its fundamental relationship with artists and the arts community. I know that when I talked earlier about when we were doing planning for a cultural district in downtown Minneapolis and artists led it, you know, getting artists to the table, and it's not just around a cultural district plan, but it is around public works plans and projects. For instance, the reconstruction of a major street should be led by artists. It could be. It could engage people more frequently at a higher level, and it would be, rather than people feeling that a project was being done to them, they could understand their role and it would be done with them. And that's really a fundamental shift. And the other thing that we can then do, since nobody's paying attention to time, since well, okay, you
Tom,
did, but
Tom.
Okay. But if we were to do that, we could also be helping support artists in the work that they do. And what we really want from our arts community is for artists to be practicing their craft, to be practicing being artists. And so the challenge for the city is really to figure out, how do we do that? How do we generate opportunities for artists to be putting money in their pocket so that they can make decisions about where and how they want to live? Thank you. Again.
So the timekeeper's name is Betsy, and I don't recommend messing with her. Betsy's don't like being messed with. When it comes to NRP, I don't know, but I suspect I might be the only person on here who served on my neighborhood council. I was on my neighborhood council for 4 years. I was the co-chair for 2. You were 2? Great, then I am not the only person up here, but I will say this. I was not trying to ply falsehoods. I was on my neighborhood council for 4 years. I served as the co-chair for 2 during the time when we were implementing the end of Phase 1 NRP, moving into Phase 2. I know how incredibly important it is to make sure that neighborhoods have the funding they need to organize neighbors, to have a voice for neighbors, and to do work in the neighborhoods. And that's why when it came time, when the sunset came on NRP and we were looking for what came next, I fought hard to make sure that we had ongoing funding, reliable source of funding for neighborhoods and neighborhood organizations, to have that base level of funding so that all neighborhoods could work with neighbors, thrive, do outreach, be that voice, but also do the work in the neighborhood and have funding to do projects inside the neighborhood, and that's what we've been having. As we approach the third phase, I am open to seeing what did we learn from the second part of this and what do we need to do moving forward. But whatever happens, we need to be investing in our neighborhood organizations. The leadership that's come out of it, the great community work that's come out of it, all incredibly important.
I agree wholeheartedly that we need to be investing in our neighborhood organizations, that we need to strengthen leadership of the organizations and make sure that there is adequate funding available. Part of this conversation, from my perspective, has to do with how we envision the future of the city of Minneapolis and how are we working to shift the status quo and to transform what our city looks like in light of the new normal that we're facing. And so that means when we're thinking about neighborhoods, what kind of power should our neighborhood organizations have? How do we ensure that there's equity in terms of the distribution of resources and equity in terms of which voices are heard at City Hall? I live in the Hawthorne neighborhood in North Minneapolis that ranks last amongst Minneapolis neighborhoods for health impacts, quality of life, home ownership, affordable housing issues, criminal justice issues. And so I know directly the impacts of not having access to power and resources that our neighborhoods need. So we need to revitalize the NRP program, but more importantly, we need to cast a new vision for the city that is transformative.
I think I agree with everyone up here that absolutely NRP should have gotten a Phase 3. The question is, why didn't it? And then we'll see where the resources were directed. And as usual, they were directed to a lot of downtown interests. And my worry is that despite all of us agreeing that NRP should receive funding, we simply won't have the resources for it. And this is based on how we've been investing our resources in the past 4 years. I mean, for example, anyone who opened the Star Tribune today would see the article on which not only has the Nicollet Mall redevelopment gone on for far longer than it's supposed to, now we're going to put more money into PR to make sure that that project doesn't get a bad rap in the next coming months, even though it's supposed to be finished already. So, I mean, that's the way we're investing money in our city. Tens of thousands of dollars towards an item like that. $2 million towards a new website. I work professionally as a web developer. We are investing about 5 times as much as that website is worth into redesigning it. And so these are the ways that our city's resources are going to get used over and over and over unless we have new leadership. We need a complete paradigm shift. The past 4 years have not been good. It has been spending completely in the wrong directions. That's my resources, that's your resources, and they deserve to be spent towards the correct route. A no-brainer would be a Phase 3 for the NRP program.
So for this next round of questions, we're going to... One last question. For this last question, we're actually holding you to the time. We've let that slip a little bit, and I've had to be fair. But this last question is one, it's a human question, which is, for your arts experience, what is your most memorable catalytic arts experience?
I know exactly what it is, and I think I'm going to maybe can cry a little bit on this, and I'm going to... So I mentioned earlier that both of my parents were professional modern ballet dancers. And after every performance, many of the dancers, they had performed at the Kennedy Center, they would come over to our house and we would have the party afterwards. And I never really liked dance, honestly. When I was very, very young, I thought it was boring. I didn't like going to the Kennedy Center to watch the performances until we went to what I believe was called White Oak Ballet. and Baryshnikov walked out on the stage. And my brother and I were complaining to each other until Baryshnikov walked out and simply raised his hand. And the charisma and the excitement of the whole experience, my brother and I leapt out of our seats and we were cheering through the roof. And it was, I think it was not only special in that we got to see this legend, who I believe was living in Minnesota for a while, by the way, but it was also finding a connection with kind of my parents' past.
This is a hard one because I have a lot of them. But, you know, I think perhaps the most moving was we, at Hennepin Theater Trust, we ran a Spotlight Musical Theater program that involved high schools around the state. And we had an annual event, and I always gave out the award to Washburn High School because I went to Washburn High School. And this kid was getting an award for being a triple threat award winner, which meant he could sing, act, and dance really, really well. And he was from a family that didn't act, or they had no connection with theater at all. And so I got to give him this award, and I'm going to tear up, and we both went backstage and cried because it was so exciting.
When I must have been 23, 24, 25, I saw the film Dead Man Walking. And it was catalytic for me as a film because of its subject and the tenderness with which it treated someone who had been a perpetrator. And I am a survivor of sexual assault, of childhood sexual assault. I've been public about that. And I saw that movie, and afterwards was lifted from me the burden of resentment and anger I had been carrying toward perpetrators, and the realization that every single person on this planet is a human being, whether they can act like I'm one or not. I get to decide whether I act as though they are human, and it was lifted from me. It was an extraordinary moment in my life. There is a before and after in my life. It never occurred to me that I would get to thank Sister Helen Prejean for the work that she did that led to the creation of that movie. Until a couple years ago, I found myself standing next to her on a stage, not even knowing that it was she, and she was introduced to someone, and I found out who she was, and I turned to her, and I got to thank her for the work she did that led to the art that changed my life, and that moment also changed my life.
I wrote this poem when I was 17 to deal with racial discrimination that I was facing as a kid in boarding school. Like Martin Luther King, I also have a dream, although it may not seem that I am on the right team. But it doesn't matter. Before we start to scatter, I'm asking the Lord to please send down a ladder to my kind of people who have gone through misery, and yet we have survived 400 years of slavery. Take it from me, it's hard for you to see. Like it or not, I'm still enslaved in my community. Even though I am now part of the majority, the world still looks at me as if I'm a minority. But I'm doing my best and coming up in life. I have my education, and I also make a good wife. I'll stop there.
For me, it was a quilt. When we first came to America, it was my mother, my sister, and me, and we had no safety net. We had no support system. All we had was this school in South Minneapolis called Longfellow Elementary, and the staff there, for some reason, just really liked my mom, and they said, "We'll hire you." So they hired her to make a quilt, and I remember every single panel of it, and just seeing how practical it can be to make something beautiful and how much that can unify people. And because this was a new country to us, this was a new society to us, she made something that was just amazing. It was beautiful. And that was the first time in my life that I feel like I've ever been struck by something that was made by a human being purely for the beauty of it. And that's something that will never leave me. And I also think that's why my family's in the country right now. So, yeah.
Wow, I get to go last after all that. So I'm going to cheat and say two things. One was working backstage at the State Fair when the New York Dolls performed, it was an incredible experience. But probably the most memorable experience for me was when I was taking my arts education class as part of my studio arts minor at the University of Minnesota, and this local sculptor who was anything but local, Zoran Mosislav, came and talked about how he got into sculpture. And he talked about the story about he was a wrestler, I was a wrestler, and that he never won trophies. So one day, he made a trophy for himself, and he brought it to his dad and said, "Look, Dad, I have a trophy." And that launched a career of what I think is an incredible artist and has been an asset to this community in ways that I don't think many of us really understand. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for your human answer on that one, and but also just for participating in this forum. You're going to have a board member now from the Northeast Minneapolis Arts District who's going to send you on your way. I think we're going to go nibble.
Very much for all of the mayor's candidates for coming. We're very great.